People who lack the ability to focus, they're always distracted. They're always distracted. We're not talking stuff like ADHD, because there are people who don't have those kinds of things, who don't have the ability to focus. Why? Because they don't emotionally regulate. You notice the thing about emotional regulation keeps coming out. Have you noticed that? Be aware of that. To be achievement oriented, when you're the kind of person that lacks the ability to focus or to be achievement oriented, you're going to lack motivation. What is the motivation that I live by to live for us? Because I don't want to live in divorce or brokenness or craziness. I grew up in it. And because I want to be able to focus and achieve, I want to make sure that when Luell and I are in a conflict, that at the end of the conflict, us is still intact, that we are still we, that we're not just two individuals that have lost that love and feeling, as the righteous brothers sing. You see, when you lack the ability to focus or achieve, you're easily distracted. You lack self-direction. You see, you lack the ability to make choices about where you want to go and how you want to get there. And you'll find long-term that people who tend to lack the ability to achieve and focus and create something that they want for themselves, they tend to give up over time. They fear failure, but they'll self-sabotage. Why? Because if I can self-sabotage, then I didn't really fail. I can blame it on something else. Because there's always that fear of failure, a fear that they'll never be good enough, a fear that they can't have the marriage that they want, a fear that they'll never be loved, a fear that they'll never be accepted. Thus, they don't try. They give up. They quit. They just exist in the relationship. But you'll actually find that same pattern in other aspects of their life. Again, we're talking about personality traits that are left unchecked, that have damaged your relationship. Now, I would argue on some level I was that way early on in our marriage, mainly because I was so deeply insecure and I didn't have a healthy sense of self and I didn't believe in myself. And I had to come to that realization that I am good enough, I am lovable, and those things. I believe that to be true today. Because of that, also, I became achievement oriented. You got a PhD and 2 master's degrees. You got to be achievement oriented to accomplish that, right? We're not talking honorary ones, folks. We're talking earned ones, right? From accredited schools. Began to realize, though, not just from an academic standpoint, I needed to be achievement oriented in personal development. To get that, I needed to be achievement oriented in personal development. I needed to be a healthy, mature adult. I needed to be a guy who could love maturely. I needed a guy who can handle conflict with goodwill and respect. I needed to be a person that even in conflict, I could still be caring. But in order to live a life of goodwill, respect, and empathy, I had to become humble. There was no place for pride in those three traits. And so I began to do the work to live the best I could, not perfectly, but maturely, a life of humility. And I quit worrying about things I couldn't control. Serenity prayer. You know, I've had a lot of hurts and pains over the years, some self-inflicted, but many not. Many because of toxic systems I was hanging out with, like church systems or toxic people that I didn't know were toxic at the time. But as I began to grow and mature within myself, to become that mature person who has accomplished and established the 4 competencies of emotional intelligence, you know what I realized? Life became sweeter. Life became more meaningful. Why? Because I had the freedom to choose in the present how I want to live my life, who I wanted in my life, what I did and did not want in my life. And that's a very powerful way to live life, you see. And so the next trait we talked about here is left unchecked. A person's lack of ability to focus or achieve will harm their marriage. Now, the next one is when you act out hurt and pain because you externalize things. Okay, in other words, something's happening, and rather than taking the hard look inside and asking, what is this about? What is this about me? It's just 1/200th of a second. It's how fast it goes. You externalize that pain, and now you act out emotionally that you act out emotional pain. I said that wrong. You act out emotional pain in hurtful ways. We call it fighting with ill will tactics. You manipulate, you seduce, you yell, you scream, you withdraw, you suck, you pout, you sarcasm, name calling, minimizing. Now, there's in our Relate Well curriculum, we have a whole list that we call fighting with ill will. All of those things begin to show up in a moment. Why? Because you're hurting inside, and I get that, and we all want to hurt inside. But because you don't know how to handle that pain, you externalize it, and then you project that pain onto other people, your spouse, your kids, people at work. Because whenever you live a life of externalizing what's going on inside of you by pushing it outwards onto others, you actually have little regard, because you're actually lacking empathy, by the way. You have little regard for how you come across and the damage that you're doing. Remember we talked earlier about self-awareness? Folks that externalize through acting out their pain lack self-awareness. And the sad part of this is, though it's a form of self-awareness, I get it on some level. You're doing it and you know you're doing it. That's a different animal. Most people, it's just unconscious. It's just because they externalize. They just act out pain by dumping it off on other people, be it in aggressive ways or passive aggressive ways, right? The problem is, it is evidence of your inability to care. It is evidence of your ability to move to compassion and empathy, which is a higher order brain functioning. Right up here, neocortex. It's the regulator for the lower order brain. And so whenever you act out and hurt people along the way, because you're hurting inside, you're damaging other people. And here's the other piece of it. You're actually betraying your own self. You're betraying your own humanity. You're betraying you. Because whenever you act out by externalizing your pain onto others, through whatever acting out behavior you do, you understand that you're not just harming your spouse and your marriage, the idea of us. You're actually betraying yourself. Healthy, mature adults don't act that way. They take the deep breath and they move to goodwill and respect. But when you act out, there is no goodwill and respect, because it's all about you. And when you do that, you hurt yourself. You harm you. Your self-esteem continues to whittle away. Your self-respect whittles away. Over time, self-hatred may show up. You know, healthy, loving, mature people with good personalities are able to self-regulate that negative lower order brain that moves into the fight or flight response. And because they care about themselves and who they are, because they value being a person of goodwill and respect and humility and empathy, that's the 4 words we submit people should live by, they'll treat you in a very different way.